Los Angeles, 1985. The city of dreams. The city that never stops moving, but where millions get left behind. On a quiet hill overlooking the shining lights, a young man sits alone in his old car. His pockets are almost empty, but his mind is full of something far more powerful. Hope. His name is Jim Carrey, and tonight he's about to make a promise to himself that will change his life forever. He takes out an old checkbook. The paper is worn, the ink fading, but his hand is steady. Slowly he writes, $10 million. Pay to the order of Jim Carrey. Memo, for acting services rendered. Then he signs it, not as a joke, not as a fantasy, but as a declaration, a message to the universe that one day he'll cash it. He folds the check carefully, slides it into his wallet, and looks at the endless city below him. The same city that's rejected him time and time again. In that moment, he's broke. No home, no real job. Just a dream, and a stubborn belief that he was meant for more. Every night, after struggling through auditions that went nowhere, Jim would drive up Mulholland Drive, park his car, and sit there for hours. He would close his eyes and visualize crowds laughing at his jokes, movie sets calling his name, and people cheering for him. He saw it all, before anyone else did. It wasn't delusion, it was discipline. Because while most people wait to see before they believe, Jim chose to believe before he saw. But belief alone isn't magic. He knew he had to work, to grind, to fail 100 times before the world noticed. Still, that little check in his wallet reminded him that his vision had a destination, and that one day the road would take him there. Years later, when success finally came, when the world laughed with him in Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber, he reached into that same wallet, and there it was, the faded check written to himself all those years ago. And the most extraordinary part? That very week, Jim Carrey received his first real paycheck for $10 million. A dream written on paper turned into reality. But this story isn't just about money. It's about clarity. It's about the power of vision, to see something that doesn't yet exist, and to walk toward it every single day. Because sometimes faith isn't about hoping. It's about knowing. And Jim Carrey knew, long before anyone else, that his life would change. All he had to do was hold the vision long enough for reality to catch up. Welcome to Deep Dollar Stories. Today, we explore how one man used the power of visualization, not just to build wealth, but to build the life he imagined. Before the fame, before the laughter, before the millions, there was a boy in Canada who couldn't even afford a smile. His name was Jim Carrey, and his childhood was far from funny. He was born in Newmarket, Ontario, into a family that believed in hard work and simple dreams. His father, Percy, was a talented saxophone player, a man who once dreamed of performing on grand stages. But life, as it often does, had other plans. To feed his family, Percy took a job as an accountant. It wasn't his passion, but it was steady, reliable, safe. For a while, things were okay. The Carreys lived in a small but warm home. They laughed, they prayed, they believed that someday things would get better. But then, the safety net snapped. When Jim was 12, his father lost his job. And just like that, everything they had, stability, comfort, security, disappeared. The family was forced to move into a Volkswagen van parked next to a factory where Percy found janitorial work. At night, Jim would help clean floors and scrub toilets with his brother and sisters. It wasn't just work, it was survival. Imagine being 16 and realizing your dreams don't even have space to breathe. Every night, while other teenagers laughed, Jim was polishing factory floors under fluorescent lights. Every morning, he'd stare into the mirror and practice funny faces, not to entertain the world, but to remind himself that joy still existed somewhere. Those early years carved something deep inside him, a hunger, not for fame, not for money, but for freedom. He once said, "I learned that you can fail at what you don't want, so you might as well take a chance on doing what you love." And that lesson was born right there, between the echoes of factory machines and the silence of a van parked under cold Canadian rain. Jim wasn't the smartest student. He struggled with dyslexia and often felt out of place at school. But when it came to making people laugh, he had a gift, a light, a spark. He could mimic anyone, teachers, celebrities, classmates. He'd turn pain into performance, sadness into comedy. At 16, he decided to chase that spark. He dropped out of school and began performing stand-up in small comedy clubs around Toronto. Most nights, the audience didn't laugh. Some nights, they booed. But Jim kept going. He was awkward, intense, unpredictable. But there was something about him that couldn't be ignored. Every failure became fuel. Every rejection was a rehearsal for resilience. There were nights when he'd walk back home, pockets empty, wondering if he was chasing a ghost. But when he looked at his father, the man who'd sacrificed his dreams for stability, only to lose both, he knew the truth. Playing it safe doesn't protect you from failure. So he kept performing. Sometimes for money, sometimes for a free meal, and sometimes just for the feeling of being alive. By his early 20s, he had a small reputation in the Canadian comedy scene. People said, "He's weird, but brilliant." He started sending audition tapes to TV shows in America. Most were ignored. A few were politely rejected. But Jim didn't care. He had already failed at comfort. Failure at dreams didn't scare him anymore. Eventually, he packed a few clothes, his joke notebooks, and a broken dream that refused to die, and drove across the border into Los Angeles. He thought Hollywood would be waiting for him, but the truth was crueler. For months, Jim slept in his car parked near the Hollywood Hills. He couldn't afford an apartment or even proper meals. Some days he'd skip food altogether and go to open mic nights just to stay warm. People thought he was crazy, a struggling comedian with no money and too much imagination. But late at night, when the city lights flickered, he'd drive up Mulholland Drive, park on the side of the road, and talk to himself. "I will make it. I will be one of the best." He'd visualize directors shaking his hand, cameras rolling, people laughing. He didn't just wish, he saw. And in those silent drives, something powerful was forming. A belief system that would later define his entire life. The power of visualization. He believed that what you see in your mind long enough will eventually show up in your life, but only if you work like it's already yours. Still, Hollywood didn't open its arms right away. He auditioned for TV shows, sketch programs, and bit parts. Most said no. But one show, In Living Color, finally gave him a chance. The producers saw something electric in him. Raw, unpredictable energy that no one else could fake. That's when the struggling factory kid from Canada started to become Jim Carrey, the entertainer. But long before the world laughed, Jim learned to laugh at himself. And that, more than anything else, became his survival tool. Hollywood, the city of stars and of shattered dreams. When Jim Carrey arrived there, he didn't carry much. Just a few clothes, a notebook full of jokes, and a fire that refused to die. He had no agent, no connections, and barely enough money to fill the tank of his beat-up car. During the day, he'd drive around Los Angeles, staring at the mansions, wondering what kind of people lived inside them. At night, he'd perform at small clubs, places that smelled of stale beer and disappointment. Some nights he'd get a laugh or two. Other nights, silence. But the silence didn't break him. It built him. Every no became a new reason to keep going. People around him would, another dreamer. Another comedian who won't make it past next month. But Jim had already lived through failure once, when his father lost his job. That experience had burned into him a lesson. Comfort is not security. So he stayed hungry, literally and figuratively. He lived on instant noodles and black coffee, sleeping in his car when rent was too expensive. Sometimes he'd park near the Hollywood sign, watching the city lights below. One day, they'll know my name. But Los Angeles didn't care about dreams. It chewed people up and spat them out. Month after month, rejection letters piled up. Auditions went nowhere. Bills grew heavier. Yet every time life tried to silence him, Jim fought back with humor. He'd perform for empty rooms as if they were full. He'd rehearse in front of mirrors for roles he didn't yet have. He believed that energy, the one you give the universe, always finds its way back. It was during this time that he created one of his strangest rituals, something that would one day become legendary. One night, sitting inside his old car, he pulled out a blank check. The paper was fragile, but the ink in his mind was bold. He wrote, $10 million. Memo, for acting services rendered. Then he dated it, Thanksgiving 1995. He looked at that check and smiled. Not because he had it, but because he knew he would. He folded it neatly, placed it inside his wallet, and kept it there, as a promise, not to the world, but to himself. From that night on, whenever he drove through Mulholland Drive, the winding road that overlooks Los Angeles, he'd stop, step outside, and visualize. He'd close his eyes and picture himself on movie sets. He'd see producers calling his name. He'd imagine the sound of people laughing, cameras flashing, his parents proud. He could feel it as if it had already happened. That visualization became his nightly ritual, a private rehearsal for the life he was building. Still, things didn't turn around overnight. Years passed. He got small gigs, bit parts in TV shows, minor roles in forgettable films. Nothing close to 10 million. Nothing close to the dream. But Jim never let go of that image, the picture of himself already successful. Even when reality didn't match his vision, he stayed loyal to the version of him that existed in his mind. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world began to notice. One small gig led to another. A late-night appearance turned into a bigger one. His energy, once seen as too much, was now being recognized as magnetic. By the early 1990s, Jim landed a role on a comedy sketch show called In Living Color. For the first time, millions of people saw what he could do. His characters, wild, unpredictable, hilarious, became instant favorites. He was different. He didn't just perform jokes, he became them. He could twist his face, his voice, his entire body, like his emotions were liquid. Hollywood finally opened the door, just a little, and Jim kicked it wide open. That same man who once performed for 10 people in smoky clubs was now making millions laugh across America. But deep down, he wasn't surprised. He had already seen this moment, hundreds of times, under the quiet sky of Mulholland Drive. The visualization had started working. Reality was catching up to his imagination. But even as fame began to shine on him, Jim didn't forget those nights in his car, or the check that still sat folded in his wallet. It was his anchor, a reminder of who he had been and how far he had come. Little did he know that soon, life would align in the most unbelievable way.
Dreams don't come true overnight. They take years of silence, struggle, and faith that refuses to die. For Jim Carrey, those years of belief were about to meet their moment. By the early 1990s, he was finally getting noticed. His performances on In Living Color made him one of the most original comedians in Hollywood. He wasn't like anyone else. He was chaos wrapped in brilliance, madness blended with purpose. Directors started calling, scripts started arriving, and for the first time, the boy who once cleaned factory floors was being asked to bring his wild imagination to the big screen. Then came 1994, the year everything changed. That year, Jim Carrey starred in 3 films: Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. Each one became a massive success. Almost overnight, the world knew his name. Audiences didn't just laugh, they connected. Because behind the exaggerated faces and cartoonish humor, they felt something real. A man who had fought too hard to smile. Hollywood, the city that once ignored him, now couldn't get enough of him. Producers competed for his time. Directors wrote roles just for him. And then, the call came. A studio offered him $10 million for his next movie. The exact number written years earlier on a piece of paper sitting in his wallet. When Jim heard the offer, he went silent. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that belief, when matched with relentless effort, has power. Later, he drove back to that same spot on Mulholland Drive, where he used to park his car and stare at the city below. This time, he wasn't broke. He wasn't invisible. He was living the vision he once imagined 1,000 times in the dark. He opened his wallet, pulled out the faded check, creased, worn, but still there. He smiled, because the universe had kept its promise. But more importantly, so had he. He had believed before anyone else did. He had stayed loyal to a future no one could see but him. That moment wasn't just about a number. It was a reminder that reality eventually mirrors the picture we hold most consistently in our minds. And Jim's picture was clear. He didn't want to be rich for the sake of luxury. He wanted to create, to inspire, to make people laugh the way he wished someone had made him laugh in those darker days. The money was a milestone, but not the destination. When asked years later about that famous check, he said, "I wrote myself that check because I wanted to see something physical, a goal, a target. But it wasn't the check that made it happen. It was the work. It was the belief. It was me showing up every single day." And that's the part most people miss. Visualization is not fantasy, it's focus. It's seeing your dream so vividly that your daily actions start aligning with it. It turns belief into behavior, and behavior turns dreams into results. Jim didn't attract success by wishing for it. He became the kind of person success couldn't ignore. His story reminds us that the world doesn't bend for talent. It bends for persistence. The kind of persistence that keeps going when the world says no. The kind that sees light when everyone else only sees darkness. That's the real power of visualization. It's not about magic. It's about direction. When you know who you want to be, every choice you make becomes a step toward it. And on that night, under the same stars that once witnessed his tears, Jim Carrey looked over Los Angeles and whispered to himself, "It worked." Not because life handed him luck, but because he believed long enough for the world to catch up. Fame changes your life, but it also tests who you are. For Jim Carrey, the climb from poverty to millions was only the first half of his story. The second half was learning what success really meant. When the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds went home, he often found himself alone, staring at the same kind of silence he once felt in his car years earlier. Only now, he wasn't broke. He had everything he once dreamed of: wealth, fame, admiration. And yet, something was missing. He started to realize that the check, the houses, the applause, none of it could fill the quiet spaces inside him. He once said, "I wish everyone could get rich and famous and have everything they ever dreamed of, so they would know that it's not the answer." Behind the laughter was a man still searching, not for success, but for peace. As the years passed, Jim stepped back from Hollywood's chaos. He began painting, writing, and meditating. He studied spirituality and philosophy, trying to understand the invisible thread that connected his thoughts, his dreams, and his reality. He talked about the ego, that voice inside us that says, "I need more to be enough." And he realized that for most of his life, he'd been chasing approval. Now, he wanted authenticity. He said in an interview, "The great illusion of this world is that you're just this little person with this name and this history. But that's not who you are. You are awareness itself, watching it all unfold." It was a truth that few expected from a comedian. But Jim had lived both extremes: emptiness in poverty and emptiness in success. And through both, he found the same lesson. Happiness is not found in what you get, but in who you become. He still makes people laugh, but now his laughter carries depth. It's the sound of someone who's seen both the mountain and the valley, and knows that neither defines him. And that's why Jim's story is more than a tale of fame. It's a mirror, reflecting the truth that every one of us is chasing something: money, recognition, validation. But what if what we're really chasing is ourselves? Because success can give you everything you thought you wanted, and still leave you asking, now what? Jim learned that the true power of visualization wasn't about manifesting wealth. It was about aligning with purpose, becoming someone capable of peace, gratitude, and joy, no matter what's in your bank account. He visualized success, yes, but he also visualized balance. And that's what turned his dream into something greater than money. At the end of it all, the boy who once slept in a van learned that freedom doesn't come from the world giving you everything. It comes when you no longer need the world to give you anything. Jim Carrey's story isn't just about a man who became rich. It's about a man who became aware. He showed the world that success is built twice, first in the mind, then in reality, and that the most powerful tool any of us have is imagination with intention. Because when you can see the life you want, not as a wish, but as a truth, you start walking differently, you speak differently, you think differently, and slowly, the world around you begins to change. But here's the part people forget. Visualization isn't about sitting back and waiting. It's about working from a place of faith, not fear. It's about trusting that your effort is not wasted, it's invested. Jim's journey from poverty to millions reminds us that every dream carries a cost: long nights, uncertainty, and moments of doubt. But if you keep believing, if you keep showing up, the reward isn't just success, it's transformation. So tonight, wherever you are, whether you're at the beginning of your story or somewhere in the middle, take a moment to visualize your future. Not with anxiety, not with desperation, but with clarity. Because clarity is power. And remember, you don't need to be Jim Carrey to change your life.
You just need to believe as deeply as he did, and act on that belief every single day. This was Deep Dollar Stories, where real lives meet real lessons, and where every story reminds us that the distance between who you are and who you want to be is only a decision away. If Jim's story inspired you, hit subscribe, share it with someone who needs hope, and stay tuned for more journeys of courage, purpose, and transformation. Deep stories, smart lessons. Your journey starts now.